Most people picture Quebec as cobblestone streets in Old Montreal, the Chateau Frontenac overlooking the St. Lawrence, ski chalets tucked into the Laurentians. Drive 2 hours north of the postcard province and you'll find the other Quebec. Towns built on asbestos where airborne fibers still rise from collapsing structures. Villages drowned on 6 months' notice while Hydro-Quebec filled reservoirs around families still packing. Mining camps abandoned so fast that dinner tables stayed set for 50 years. These aren't ghost stories. They're contaminated sites on government databases, disaster zones documented in bankruptcy files, communities erased so completely that satellite imagery shows spruce forest where 800 buildings stood a decade before. 12 ghost towns across Quebec where stopping means exposure to toxins that built the province, structural collapse in buildings designed to withstand everything except abandonment, or the suffocating recognition that entire communities can be deleted when extraction economics shift. This is the hidden cost of the quiet revolution, the resource boom, the hydroelectric dreams. Written in ruins most Quebecers have never heard of. 1. Val-Jalbert. The company town, frozen in 1927. Lac-Saint-Jean region, near Chambord. A pulp mill town of 950 people, built in 1901 around the Ouiachuan Falls. Abandoned in 1 week in August 1927 when the owner died and creditors shuttered everything. The workers had 48 hours to vacate company housing. Most left with what they could carry. The mill closed mid-operation. The town emptied in 6 days. What remained was an industrial Pompeii. For decades, visitors reported newspapers still dated to that final week. Calendars frozen on August 1927, bottles on shelves, furniture in place. The company never sold the assets, never dismantled the structures. Bankruptcy left it intact, and the isolation kept it untouched. The falls still thunder beside the silent mill. The waterfall that justified the town, that powered the saws and presses, runs without purpose. 72 meters of whitewater crashing beside machinery that hasn't moved in nearly a century. Val-Jalbert is now a preserved historic site, operated as a tourist attraction since 1996. But preservation here means controlled ruin. Most buildings remain unstabilized. Winter access closes because snow loads collapse roofs in structures built when 950 people maintained them. Even as a heritage site, the danger is real. The boarding houses tilt. The mill's upper floors are off limits. These aren't replicas, they're the actual structures, held in managed decay. The creepiness isn't supernatural, it's the speed. A functioning town doesn't dissolve, it stops instantly, like a photograph. 2. Asbestos-mining. Ghost camps. The towns, built on poison, Appalachian Quebec, southeast of Thetford mines. Not one settlement, but a scatter of worker camps around exhausted asbestos operations. Black Lake Satellites, East Broughton camps, Robertsonville's edges, all built directly on chrysotile deposits, abandoned when the industry collapsed, contaminated in ways that don't fade. Quebec mined asbestos for over a century, second in the world after Russia. The Jeffrey Mine at Asbestos, recently renamed Val des Sources to escape the stigma, became an open pit that swallowed 30 city blocks, visible from orbit. Around it, dozens of camps where men lived on the material they extracted, where tailings were used as road base, insulation, fill for playgrounds. Then the science caught up. Mesothelioma, lung scarring, documented deaths. The mines closed in waves through the 1980s and 1990s, some limping until 2012. The workers left. The camps stayed. Drive the backroads now and you'll find them. Rows of tar paper shacks tilting into themselves, equipment sheds with asbestos cement panels degrading into dust, tailings piles like white mountains against the trees. The soil itself is contaminated. Kick up dust and you're breathing serpentine fibers, invisible, microscopic, carcinogenic. Quebec's Environment Ministry marks these as contaminated sites, but the warnings weather and fade. No barriers around the open pits, some plunging 300 meters. No fences at tailings ponds. The mining companies that profited dissolved or restructured. Liability evaporated. The poison stayed. The creepiest part isn't what you see, it's what you can't. Asbestos doesn't announce itself. Buildings look merely abandoned until you realize the walls are shedding fibers. The ground is laced with them. Every breath in these ruins is measurable exposure. Some towns tried to survive by denying the danger. The town of Asbestos itself clung to the industry until 2020, when the name change admitted what everyone knew. The ghost camps admit nothing. They simply sit, toxic and patient, waiting for wind or curiosity to stir the dust. 3. Gagnon, the town they erased. Côte-Nord region, 210 kilometers north of Baie-Sainte-Catherine. An iron ore town of 3,200 people, built by Quebec Cartier Mining in 1960, occupied for exactly 25 years, then systematically demolished until nothing remained. Not abandoned, erased. The mine became unprofitable in the early 1980s. The company ran the numbers. Maintaining infrastructure for a town this remote cost more than dismantling it. In 1985, every resident received an evacuation order. By 1995, the demolition was complete. Every structure removed, every foundation bulldozed, the site remediated, which meant scraping it clean, as if 3,200 people had never lived there at all. This wasn't decay, it was deletion. Gagnon had schools, a hospital, a recreation center, a curling rink. Modular homes on planned streets. It was a functioning town, photographed in 1984 with children on playgrounds and cars in driveways. Photographs from 1996 show boreal forest, as if the town had been a hallucination. Former residents describe returning to GPS coordinates, where their houses stood, and finding black spruce, moss, silence. No foundations, no rubble, not even the suggestion that anything human had existed there. The only evidence is an airstrip, cracked pavement leading nowhere, visible in satellite imagery like a scar the forest hasn't quite covered. The iron ore is still there. The deposits didn't run out. The economics shifted, and when they did, the company chose erasure over transition. Cheaper to delete a town than sell it. Stand at the coordinates today and the absence feels engineered. Most ghost towns decay. Gagnon was removed. 4. Entire communities along the Manicouagan River given eviction notices in the early 1960s. Hart John Manitou construction camp. Clusters of trappers and settlers as Hydro-Quebec's dam project prepared to flood 1,942 square kilometers behind the largest multiple-arch dam in the world. Churches dismantled stone by stone, cemeteries exhumed, graves relocated, families with 6 months to 2 years' notice, depending on elevation, watching surveyors mark the future waterline on their doorframes. In 1968, they opened the gates and let the Manicouagan River fill the reservoir. The villages disappeared under up to 100 meters of water. This wasn't disaster, it was policy. Deliberate drowning in the name of electricity for Montreal, Quebec City. The southern grid that needed power more than the north needed its villages. Former residents described the surreal final months. Moving belongings while water crept up the valley. The river rising visibly week by week. Some structures half submerged before evacuation finished. Photographs show buildings with water lines climbing their walls. Families loading trucks as the reservoir lapped at foundations. The dam still operates. The reservoir, shaped like a ring because it filled an ancient meteor impact crater, supplies massive power. Tourists fish its shores, camp along its inlets, photograph its stark beauty, almost none aware they're recreating above-drowned towns. In low-water years, when drought drops the reservoir, foundations surface. Road traces emerge. Stone markers from relocated cemeteries sometimes reappear, displaced by ice and current. Former residents return with GPS coordinates, point at open water. My house is 40 meters below that buoy. The creepiness is the erasure's completeness. No ruins to visit, no structures to photograph, just cold water over everything, and the knowledge that whole lives, streets, schools, shops, exist as silt and memory beneath a reservoir that feeds power to people who've never heard the names of what it drowned. 5. A forestry town in the Outaouais region, Gatineau Valley, founded in the 1850s to serve Ottawa Valley timber operations, now dying in real time with a population of 715, most over 60, rattling around infrastructure built for twice that number 30 years ago. The school closed in 1998, not enough children. The church deconsecrated in 2005. The general store shuttered in 2017. Its faded for sale sign bleached gray from 5 years of weather. Drive through Bouchette and you're watching the final act, the slow-motion collapse most ghost towns experience before the last resident leaves and the forest moves in. The main street is a timeline of abandonment. A 1970s Esso station, pumps removed, but the canopy still standing, rust blooming through white paint. A restaurant from the 1980s, menus visible through windows fogged with interior moisture and decades of dust. A garage with a handwritten sign, closed for season. From a season that never ended, snow tires still stacked against the wall inside. Municipal services exist in theory. The roads are paved but potholed, patched once every few years when provincial funding allows. Streetlights work on some blocks, dark on others. Side streets get no winter clearing. Residents who remain plow their own driveways and stay put until spring. No kids, no working-age adults. No economy except old-age pensions and the occasional hunter passing through. The town is technically incorporated, legally alive, functionally finished. The church steeple is visible for kilometers, white against the forest, a landmark for a community that exists now primarily as a mailing address and a collective decision not to admit it's over. 6. Schefferville Satellite Camps. Frozen 700 kilometers from anywhere. Far north Quebec, near the Labrador border. Worker camps surrounding an iron ore town built by the Iron Ore Company of Canada in the 1950s. Knob Lake, Ruth Lake, Fleming. Abandoned when the mine closed in 1982 and left to the subarctic, where extreme cold doesn't let things decay so much as freeze them in place. The town of Schefferville itself partially survives, about 200 people, mostly indigenous, serving regional functions. But the worker camps died completely. Ruth Lake housed over 200 men, rows of identical bunkhouses, a mess hall, equipment sheds, all built for the 5 to 10 years it would take to extract the ore and move on. When the iron ore market crashed in 1982, the evacuation was immediate. Workers were flown out within weeks. The camps were abandoned mid-operation. Subarctic preservation means the buildings don't rot. They warp. Permafrost heaves and settles unpredictably. Foundations tilt, walls twist, but don't collapse. Walk through now, and you'll find beds still made, lockers still closed, dishes in sinks. Not because someone staged it, because in temperatures that plunge to -40, organic decay nearly stops, and no one has bothered to come back. The isolation is absolute. Schefferville is 700 kilometers from Siptil, the nearest city. The rail line still exists, freight only. Passenger service ended in 2012. In winter, ice roads sometimes connect the camps, but they're unofficial, ungroomed, used by trappers and no one else. This is polar bear country. The camps sit where boreal forest surrenders to tundra. Former mess halls now shelter wildlife. The boundaries between human and wild dissolved the moment the last truck left. 7. Joutel, the gold town abandoned overnight. Abitibi-Témiscamingue region, nord du Quebec, a modern planned community built by Baie-Sainte-Catherine in 1974 for gold and copper extraction, occupied for 20 years, then abandoned in 1994 when the ore ran out and 600 people left a functioning 1970s suburb to rust in the wilderness. This wasn't a frontier camp. It was modular homes with satellite dishes, a school with a gymnasium, a recreation center, basketball hoops on paved courts. The company built it with contemporary architecture, wood paneling, orange shag carpet, obgates, avocado appliances, assuming the mine would justify decades of operation. The mine closed in 1993. Sell-by offered to sell houses to employees for $1 each. Most declined. Without the mine, there was no employment. Without employment, no reason to own a house 100 kilometers from the nearest gas station. The population evacuated en masse over 6 months. The company removed mine equipment, but left the town infrastructure not worth salvaging. What remains is a 1990s suburb returned to the forest. Roofs sag under snow load, but haven't collapsed. These buildings were engineered for harsh climate. Satellite dishes still point skyward from houses with smashed windows. Playground equipment stands in yards where saplings now grow through the swing sets. The aesthetic is uncanny specifically because it's recent, not century-old ruins. 1970s domestic architecture decaying in real time. Kitchen cupboards with peeling laminate, bathrooms with mustard yellow fixtures, living rooms where you can still see carpet patterns under decades of water damage and animal waste. Drive the subdivision streets and the layout is pure suburban planning. Cul-de-sacs, curved roads, designated green space, all empty. Street signs still legible, directing no one nowhere. 8. Murdochville, the company town that refused to die and wished it had. A copper mining city built for 5,700 in the Gaspésie Highlands, now maintained by 668 people. Population down 88% since the mine closed in 1999. Living inside infrastructure designed for nearly 10 times their number. Full street grids lit at night for blocks where 2 houses have residents. A community center built to hold hundreds, hosting bingo for 15. Neighborhoods laid out in careful suburban planning now contain 1 occupied home per street. Lights in a single window while 6 identical houses stand dark on either side. The mine head frame still dominates the skyline, the steel tower visible from every approach, a monument to extraction that lasted 48 years before copper prices and depleted deposits made continuing impossible. Noranda Mines owned everything: the land, the houses, the water system, the roads. When the company left, the town had no economic foundation except the hole in the ground and the workers who'd filled it. Most left. The remaining 668 are trapped by unsellable real estate, municipal debt from maintaining systems built for thousands, and the arithmetic of abandonment. Houses worth $5,000 to $15,000 with no buyers. Infrastructure costs exceeding the tax base by margins that compound annually. The creepiness is the mismatch. Sidewalks serving no pedestrians, fire hydrants on streets where nine. Dupuis and Arntfield, the twin mining camps lost in the forest. Gold rush boom towns from the 1920s. Abitibi frenzy, abandoned by the 1960s so completely that forest reclaimed them to the point of invisibility. Log buildings exist as ruins in trees, foundations swallowed by undergrowth. Structures so overgrown that GPS coordinates lead explorers to moss-covered shapes barely recognizable as human construction. Arntfield Cemetery remains partially maintained, tended graves from the 1920s surrounded by wilderness, the town's ruins invisible beyond the tree line, while Dupuis' chaotic frontier layout preserves the makeshift desperation of men who built shelters expecting to strike gold and leave, not knowing the forest would stay, and they would vanish. 11. Opimiska, the copper town poisoned by its own success. Nord du Quebec, Chibougamau region. A copper mining camp of 500, operated from 1953 to 1991, where decades of extraction created environmental devastation, visible in orange-red acid mine drainage staining waterways, unfenced toxic tailings ponds, and soil contaminated with heavy metals where vegetation struggles to establish even 30 years after closure. The mine shaft remains as a capped opening in the landscape, buildings still standing but officially designated hazardous by Quebec's Environment Ministry. The entire site under ongoing monitoring while downstream systems continue degrading from metals leaching through groundwater that no remediation budget will ever fully address. 12. Baie-Sainte-Catherine's drowned predecessor, swallowed by the river. The original village at the Saguenay-St. Lawrence confluence, settled in the 1600s, progressively undermined by River erosion through the 1800s until the 1930s, when remaining residents relocated uphill and watched their former homes collapse intact into water, where they remain today, preserved in cold currents. Divers report foundations, walls, partially intact structures on the river bottom, while the old cemetery continues eroding at the cliff edge. Bones and casket fragments occasionally exposed before sliding into the confluence where tidal mixing creates currents that require expert certification to survive. The modern whale-watching tourist town overhead, unaware, it overlooks a village that fell into the river piece by piece across a century. 12 towns built to extract something: iron, copper, gold, asbestos, power from rivers, then abandoned the moment extraction stopped being profitable. Quebec's ghost towns aren't accidents. They're the documented cost of resource economics written across the shield. It is built in open pits, tailings piles, and empty streets where infrastructure for thousands serves no one. Gagnon erased like it never existed. Val-Jalbert frozen mid-operation in 1927. Asbestos camps still shedding carcinogenic dust. Villages drowned for hydroelectric reservoirs while families packed. Bouchette dying in real time as you read this. The pattern repeats because the math is simple. When extraction costs exceed profit, walk away. Let the province absorb the contamination, the structural collapse, the geographic erasure. Most Quebecers never hear these names, never see the ruins, never stand at Manicouagan's shore knowing entire communities sleep beneath the surface. That forgetting is institutional. The price of progress buried where it won't complicate the postcard version. But drive north of anywhere long enough, and you'll find one. A town in boom, in bust, or in that slow fade between occupation and total reclamation. The smart money is always on reclamation.